Welcome to Movies That Matter, the podcast about recent films going above and beyond the call of box office returns to boldly explore a social issue affecting people's lives. I'm Nicole Finari.
And I'm Stacy Moore.
All right, Stacy, what movie are we going to overanalyze this week?
This week, we're overanalyzing Only the Brave, the true story of the Granite Mountain hotshots from Prescott, Arizona, who traveled across the West every fire season, stopping wildfires in their tracks before they could destroy countless homes and communities. What did you think?
Okay, so remember back when we did Hidden Figures, and you were like, this could have just been a made-for-TV movie. You said you were skeptical about whether or not it was really going to come off as a film.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like this could have been a really good TNT movie and really didn't need to be in theaters. What did you think?
I see what you mean about kind of the tone of it and the subject matter. But I was pretty glad to see it in a theater, that I saw it in a theater, simply because sitting in those first few rows with the screen right up, like towering over me, made the scenes with the these like giant wildfires kind of coming over the crests far more like impactful than if I had like watched it on an iPad or something.
Yeah, I guess on a big screen TV though, I wouldn't have had an issue.
That's true.
I was never really sucked into it. Were you?
It took me, okay, so I had kind of a progression with this movie, which basically went, it went thusly. So I was like, I started out at the beginning thinking like, not expecting much. I was kind of like, this movie is going to be like, yeah, like almost like a TNT original probably. We meet the guys and I'm thinking, okay, these are a bunch of white dudes being douchey white dudes. Like, I didn't like them at all. I found their fraternity antics, like, utterly charmless. And then as the movie went on, I kind of, oh, right. And I didn't know this was a true story, P.S.
Okay.
So we meet the guys, and then I started to realize, oh, this looks like it's actually a true story just from the captions and whatnot. And I was thinking, a couple people probably don't make it. Maybe one or two principal characters die. And then as the movie went on, I was like, they're all toast, aren't they? Like, all these guys are going to die, aren't they? And then when Miles Teller, like, kind of drives off in the golf cart and says, like, don't miss me too much, I went, oh my God, they're all going to die, and they're heroes, and I'm a jerk. and then I just, yeah. And so I realized, okay, this is an accurate depiction. Like, they can't help being white dudes. They were just a bunch of white dudes who risked their lives on the daily to protect strangers. And I felt like a real asshole at the end of it. And I did start to connect with the personal, sort of the individuals themselves. I found an emotional connection to them by the end of the movie.
Okay, so, point one, like, that's not actually true. At least one of the guys was Latino from reading that real story. The story that sort of sparked the movie that was in GQ, which I will post to the show notes. But yeah, when they got separated, I was like, oh, are they all going to die or is it just going to be him? Like,
right.
That was my first clue.
One of the two.
They're not going to make it.
Yeah.
But I mean, by that time, I was a little bit more invested in them, but I wasn't particularly invested in any of the guys. And I will just say this. There was like one beefcake scene. There was like one scene where they all had their shirts off. One.
I know, and I remember that scene.
I was a little frustrated.
Yeah.
And then two, what they did to Taylor Kitsch's face with that horrible mustache.
That was pretty
unforgivable in movie making.
Egregious.
Unforgivable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I want to hold off on some of the thematic elements until we do the deeper dive on that. But I really don't have a whole lot to say about the movie cinematically. Like, I found the characterization was just very, for a true story, like it was a very pat. You had this supervisor who's this gruff, lovable guy, but he's super reckless because he just believes in his men so much. And I was like, this is just such a cliche. Are you kidding me? And it wasn't true to life. And yeah, I guess I did sort of like the frat boy-ness start so that you start to see them as grow up and mature out of that. I thought that part was nice. But yeah, in the beginning, it was a little hard to take. I found, I don't know, I found the movie kind of flat. Like there were some beautiful shots because there were some beautiful scenery, but I didn't really feel like the movie added anything to that. Did you?
I definitely see what you mean. There were a lot of great scenes, individual scenes, like the helicopter, the air tanker, like draining that swimming pool at the beginning. I thought was a really fun way to start. Watching those burning trees fall into the Grand Canyon one by one while the guys like are drinking beers and just watching with their legs dangling off the edge. I thought that was really beautiful. Or the hot shots kind of chill. Like, one of my favorite scenes is the hot shots chilling around this like 2,000-year-old tree that they've kind of cordoned off. Exactly. And while the fire, like this giant wildfire, like roars up to them, and they're just kind of like hanging out. Like some of them aren't even like facing the fire. They're just, killing time, and it just roars up and just stops dead at their feet. And I was like, oh, that's a lot of fun. But I felt like, and then the kind of the big kind of climactic fire at the end where they were all deploying and getting ready when they realized like there's no running from this. We're gonna have to deploy in place. When that fire comes up over that ridge, I felt sick to my stomach. Like I thought I was gonna hurl. Like I was so upset, and I was really, really distraught. Like afterwards, when we realized that they all literally burned to death, and we have to watch their families like deal with that. I was like, and Miles Teller's performance and Jennifer Connelly's, and even Jeff Bridges like gets like a second in there, and with the performances on top of knowing that this actually happened, I was pretty upset. I emotionally connected by the end in a way that surprised me.
I felt like definitely the scene. I thought Miles Teller did a good job, did a credible job, just looking, carrying all that survivor's guilt and just having it written all over his face because there really wasn't a lot of dialogue for him. And I found the scene in the gym where all the families of the men are like waiting to hear what's happened. I mean, from, the lowliness extra in that scene, everyone, it was very affecting for me. I agree. I found it extremely emotional. And I was glad they didn't just like draw out the like tell us what was going on thing, because that actually has been a cliche in a few movies as well. But I did find it very affecting when you saw their families and how upset everybody was, and how much, even though they were in dangerous jobs, like no one was really prepared for them to actually go, I think. And you see, the guys aren't really prepared for it. Like they know it's out there, but they don't ever consider it a real risk to themselves.
Sure. I think in that GQ article you sent that you forwarded to me, and everyone should read it, it's pretty interesting. They mentioned that most guys will deploy their what were those covers? There are these, so the guys all have these covers,
like foil covered.
Yeah, it's like foil with like silicone thread or something, and ideally you lay down feet towards the flames and cover yourself with this thing that you've got in your pack, and it will hopefully, if the fire is really moving, the fire will just kind of run over you, and in those few seconds, the cover will protect you from being melted. As he was explaining that, I was kind of like, how often do we know that these things really work? Like that cover must be made of magic, but apparently people do occasionally deploy them, right?
Yeah, I think the part with the Josh Brolin, where he says he'd been deployed them, and the sort of imagery of the film of the bear on fire that's sort of chasing him through his dreams after that experience is when he's deployed under a cover and survives that. I think that, if I remember from the article, that was true. But yeah, I think in the article they say you can breathe 3 lungfuls of air over 300 degrees, and that's it. Like,
that was a shocking fact. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was just there's no way. It was unsurvivable. You're right. It would have had to have been made of magic.
So, but yeah, to your point, like they apparently most of the guys, or the guys that they knew, had deployed like once or twice, like max twice in their lifetimes, in their firefighting careers. So yeah, they didn't,
right.
It wasn't something that happens every day, that something like this, where they would actually get trapped and not be able to get out and have to resort to those means. So, and for all of them to go at once, like, I guess the article said it was the biggest, like the largest casualty of firefighters since 9/11, this Yarn Hill fire. That's just horrendous. That really, really, really tough. That is a tough break.
It was, and I mean, they don't. I think the movie, has to, by definition, sort of posit quite what went wrong. But the article definitely says, they did an investigation and no one was at fault. Like, whatever the mistake was, that they didn't know that the fire was coming at them. Like, no one was accused of incompetence.
Sure. It was just...
Or no mistakes were made. It was just
fate.
A confluence of events that went wrong.
It was a friggin' forest fire.
Yeah. And, the wind picked up faster than anyone predicted. There was miscommunication about where they are. Like, all the typical things. I always joke, from having worked in airline safety, that the only time a plane goes down is because 10 things went wrong.
Right, okay.
Like, one thing is not, there's so many fail-safes in the system. One thing going wrong isn't enough to take down a plane. It has to be a mechanical error, mechanical problem, and it has to be poor weather, and then it has to be a glitch with air traffic control. It's a confluence of things. And it was nice to see, I thought, the sort of sense of their training and their preparedness, but you can't eliminate all risk.
Sure. And I did find it just generally educational. I guess I'd never really thought about what those folks do when they're out there. And I learned that fighting wildfires appears to be a combination of like strategic yet furious digging, which actually made me respect them more. That I was like, wow, that looks really hard. That looks like hard work, where they're just, okay, we have to dig all of the vegetation from here to there in like the next 30 seconds, go. I mean, all they have is like this hoe. They're just like, like digging like madmen before the fire gets there, or, setting things on fire very carefully. Right? Mm-hmm. So that was, I didn't realize what exactly went into it.
I thought the movie did a credible job without like too much exposition about what was going on. There was times when they just left you to watch and figure out what was happening and why they were doing what they were doing. They didn't, they talked in shorthand when they talked, so that you didn't really follow. And I thought, oh, good, don't over-explain it to me. I hate when movies are like, the doctor's giving the nurse orders, and it's like, and now I need you to stick this needle in this IV with this drug, which is going to have this effect. And you're like, okay, in real life, they would not talk like that.
Correct.
We're just doing that for the audience. So I credit the movie without dumbing it down, with making all those scenes feel really realistic and letting the audience catch up as they would.
Yeah, I liked how when they would talk about, they'd refer to structure, going on the structure side, and I had to look that up afterwards. And they kept speaking about it as if it was like being put out to pasture, like retiring. So I didn't know what it meant. I looked it up. What they meant was like just regular firefighting.
Yeah, getting kittens out of trees, in their opinion, right?
Right. That's the only other thing. Yeah, I really enjoyed. I liked that as much as they started off with a lot of misogynist notes at the beginning, but you're right, that was just kind of them being like young men, and they did have kind of an arc as that went. But on that note, Jennifer Connelly had an actual character. You know, she wasn't just kind of the doting wife back at home being strong. Mm-hmm. She was like, I have problems with this, and I have things that I want, and I'm doing my best, but we should talk about it, and I've changed, and and he had a history that they shared, and she destroyed me at the end, you know, when she gets the word and comes out of the barn, mm-hmm. And when she, you know, chases after Miles Teller, so she and Eric Marsh is the kind of the gruff leader that Nicole was referring to earlier, played by Josh Brolin. His wife is played by Jennifer Connelly. And he and the sort of protagonist, Miles Teller, playing Brendan McDonough, or Donut, they all have a history mm-hmm. of drug abuse, right? And so they have that thing in common that they only allude to in the beginning. And then Jennifer Connelly actually brings it up at the end when they're all grieving, and she's telling McDonough, like, no, you can't just run off and go be sad and despondent now. We don't get to do that. And so when she stops him and she's like, kind of pulls him back to focus, that I also found that really, but it was all due to their performances. So none of them phoned it in. Like, they could have easily just, been, look, I've got a sad face, and like, they didn't. They really, they pulled no punches on this one.
I agree. That's a good point. Again, and in a sort of TNT made for TV movie way, they could have just phoned it in, and they really didn't. Mm-hmm. And I found that I really appreciated the relationship between, Eric Marsh and, I'm blanking on her name now, for having given her a fully realized character. I don't remember his name either until you said it. But
sure. No, me neither.
To be fair, Josh Brolin and Jennifer Connelly's relationship, where they have fights and they have squabbles, but you see the underlying love and commitment, and also the fact that, like, their marriage is truly on the rocks in some really critical ways in terms mm-hmm. of what they actually want from each other. And so, I mean, to transition that, this was a very interesting view of masculinity that actually came down to, like, the sort of underlying thread of this movie was work-life balance.
Huh. That's a good way to think of it.
And I think she amply sets it up when he gets so angry at Brandon Donut for asking to move to structure so he can be more present for his daughter. And he's just so dismissive of that choice. And he was like, he's just going to throw his whole life away. He's not going to commit to this job. It's the most important thing there is. And she says something along the lines of, this job is more important than his daughter. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, bam. Like, it's really hard to, like, debate your way out of that rhetorical
right.
dead end.
Yeah. Which asterisk, apparently that conversation did not happen at all. Apparently, McDonough went to him and said, I want to focus on my family. And Marsh said, I really respect you putting your family first. I support you 100%.
Yeah.
But for the sake of the movie, it definitely added something, some conflict. Yeah.
Yeah, it did. But at the same time, it's, I guess here we are in 2017. Can you imagine, 30 years ago, someone making a movie about men and this difficult, challenging thing they have to do, and how difficult it is for them to balance that with a family life, which is basically what this movie was about. And I thought, what an interesting idea. Like, who would ever ask a man if his job was more important than being home for his daughter? Again, 30 years ago, the answer would have been, but I'm doing this job for my daughter to support my family. Like, the whole mm-hmm. idea that the physical presence was there and not the monetary presence would have just been crazy.
Right. And it would have been something that it would have been a sacrifice that everyone would have just sort of nodded, solemnly and been like, he's such a hero. He gave up he gave up a relationship with his kids for us, and that would have been something that we would all be, kind of applaud. And whereas here it's like, well, no, like, don't you want to be, a part of your kid's life? Like, you deserve to be a part of your kid's life. If that's what you want, then you should have that.
And that's a worthwhile goal, and it doesn't make you less of a man for asking for it. It makes you more of a man.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. To be a father, I think too,
and someone, I read this a long time ago, someone was complaining about the rash of films that came out, particularly in the 80s, like Kramer versus Kramer, or Mr. Mom, or Three Men and a Baby, that were just all about, male incompetence with kids,
And there was a scene of that in there.
But they sort of turn it on its head, which I appreciate, where he has his kid for the first time. The kid is running this really high fever. This is Brendan McDonough, and he doesn't know what to do, so he does call a woman. But who shows up? All the men, too, to talk to him about being a dad and taking care of a sick kid. So they show the men as caring fathers. I mean, I about cried when they were on one of the scenes when they're on their bus, their like van out to a fire, and this one dude is reading Goodnight Moon to his kid over the phone.
I totally missed that.
Like, oh, you did? Oh, yeah.
Oh,
I
that's
was like,
adorable.
oh, God, you had me at Goodnight Moon. Like, it's really affecting scene, just because I'm a big fan of the book Goodnight Moon as well. And yeah, you hear some of them talking to, wives, girlfriends, kids on the phone, as on their way out, to work. And, sort of this definitely gave us a modern picture of masculinity that really took issues of, again, work-life balance, for lack of a better term, into consideration.
Yeah, it was striking how many of them were former military, and that's another industry where this comes up a lot, especially in the past, mm-hmm. like with the Gulf Wars in particular. That families don't get to see their loved ones, their service member, for months and months and months at a time. And if they go out on several tours, which now these poor men and women are doing, going on like their 6th and 7th tour, which was previously unheard of, it's mm-hmm. years. They're years that they're away from home, and it's heartbreaking. They come back, and there's a scene in there in the movie. And these guys are gone for, we should say, they leave for almost an entire, what they call the fire season, which can be like 6 mm-hmm. months, right? So he comes mm-hmm. back after one of his tours, I guess we can call it, and his kid doesn't know who he is, and that's awful. That's an awful, that's like a kick to the gut, Mm-hmm. And this little child who they don't know any better, they just don't remember you, and you're now a scary stranger to them, and oh God, I can't. Oh, that would be awful. But yeah, that's something that comes up with a lot of sort of dangerous service jobs. The families don't get to go with them anymore, like they back in the 80s during the Cold War, that was more of an option, and now it's just not, and they just don't see their kids for ages.
Yeah, and I think, though, so what's interesting to me, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, is, so this is a movie about, how much is reasonable to ask of somebody to put into their work life, right? How many hours, how much overtime, how much time away from people can and should anyone be expected to give? But I think what's interesting that they talk about it a little bit, but the movie kind of leaves it as an open question as to what is all of this for?
Uh-huh.
And my sort of cynical economist mind was very much felt like, while assuredly these people were heroes, part of me was thinking, why are any of these towns built where they can be hit by wildfire? This is nonsense. No one should have to risk their lives because somebody's living this close to a fire plane. I couldn't figure out what the justification for this extreme bravery was. Did you feel similarly bothered by why they were working this hard?
I did. Yeah, that actually did occur to me. And not even just wildfires, but also hurricanes and flooding. I think, with the last, the last 2 months, apparently, I think like 6 or 7 states have had like these natural disasters befall them. And in some cases, it's out of the ordinary. Like, when you have like a Hurricane Sandy hit New York City, you're kind of like, well, that was weird. But a lot of the times it is a place that gets frequent flooding, like Florida gets frequent hurricanes and flooding, or these areas out west that get frequent, forest fires. And I kind of start to think like, what's our obligation to repeatedly reconstruct these areas and, risk human lives because they're in zones that receive the same natural disasters like clockwork? Like if that's nature's way, is they've decided that every year I'm going to burn this place to the ground. Like maybe we shouldn't put a city there. Now, obviously, I feel like the Northern California fires we've had recently, that does not happen that often there. Like I get that. So, and I'm not implying that, Puerto Rico just shouldn't be helped, because obviously, they should have been given more aid faster. I think there's parts of Puerto Rico that still don't have water, that still don't have, what the things that Houston got right away, but which is an absolute like sin. But as far as like FEMA rebuilding, putting the money to rebuild all these homes over and over and over again in these high risk areas, I don't know. I don't know if that's if that makes any sense.
Right. And there was a good Planet Money podcast on, this guy whose whole home has been rebuilt 4 times because flood insurance in this country is federally subsidized because no insurance company would let you have insurance on a house that lived in such a hurricane prone area, right?
Sure.
And, again, as an economist, I don't, I'm not some like Chicago school, the market solves all problems, but I do think like, hello, the market's like, this is not affordable. Like, I'm not going to insure you. You're too high risk. So we decide to use government money, to have taxpayers and the people in America spend their money so someone can live in a hurricane prone district. And I'm like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And so while I think I wish the movie would have, heroism is a really tricky topic. And for certain, I loved that they saved that freaking tree.
Absolutely.
Yes, totally.
What a great moment.
I'm not advocating that there should be no firefighters or, let it all burn to the ground. But I did think there was an eerie tension at the heart of this film when they talk about, how difficult this job is, how taxing it is, how demanding it is on their families. And then the underlying thing is, and for what? Right?
Yeah. What, for buildings?
Yeah. And they do have a discussion of that in the movie. I thought, oh, it's a delicate balance, right? They don't want to hit too hard because they don't want to seem like these guys lived, did a worthless job and died for nothing. And I don't think that they did.
Sure. No. Yeah. They were, the movie did a pretty good job. Good depending on what, how you feel about it. A good job of not venturing into any kind of political territory. So it didn't mention the fact that like forest fires have increased 5,000% in the past 40 years. #climate change. It didn't venture into it only kind of briefly mentioned towards the beginning, like local mistrust of federal oversight, like they don't get us, they can't help us.
That part was stupid and cliched. I hated
sure.
that.
Yeah, it was almost like
was
the
that,
Swiss team in Cool Runnings kind of, coming by. Like, we're the bad boys and you guys will never be as good as us. And they might as well have been wearing black you know, and they're just like, well, we're
Or,
the
like-
underdogs. We'll never be as good as them.
Exactly. Or like every time the FBI shows up in front of local cops in any like TV show ever.
There you go. Yeah, this is our jurisdiction
it's, like,
now. Goodbye, guys.
So cliche. Yeah.
That's very
Well,
true.
the real people do. Yeah. Anyway, keep going. Sorry. That got
Yeah,
on
no.
so.
But yeah, that was the last they mentioned of it, was that they were just proud to be like the first municipal, hotshot squad that wasn't funded by and sort of overseen by like a federal agency. But the truth is, federal government should help. Like, it shouldn't be on these, it shouldn't always be on the poor, like, local groups to like fend for themselves. Like, the federal government should help. But they stayed away from that too. They've tried to keep it just to the individual personal stories of these 20 guys and their families. And it kind of only kind of briefly touched on, addiction as a problem in white blue collar communities. Like there were a lot of, characters in this film that were, either in the beginning suffering from it and trying to recover. Brendan McDonough like won't take any pain meds when he gets put in the hospital at one point because he's, dedicated to recovering. But they didn't even like dwell on that too much. It was just really these people's stories.
Yeah, it was very personal. It kept it small. I agree. They kept it out of that territory. And again, I liked it, and I found it's a little surprising. Like, again, a movie about heroism and masculinity. I really didn't expect the central tension to be about how much work-life balance is appropriate to ask for. And I found actually on that front, the central tension between Jennifer Connelly and Josh Brolin is that she's changed her mind and decided that, in fact, she does want to have a family. And given the context of the rest of the movie, I wasn't sort of annoyed and frustrating, like, oh, a woman, of course, and she decides after all she really does want a baby. Like, it didn't come off that way. It came across as, like, her decision based on her as a person, not because she's a woman. Of course, she wants a baby. Like, I really appreciated that the sensitivity and the character development they did to make that decision seem very authentic to that one woman, not to women everywhere.
Absolutely. Like her character was complex enough that they earned it, right? By the time we get there. Yeah. And I think we also learned that air tankers ruin everything.
Yeah. That part where they suck all the water out of the pool in the beginning was really funny. I didn't know they did that.
That was pretty sweet.
Another
but then
thing
from
I
then
learned.
on, the air tankers do nothing. Like air tankers come off really badly in this movie. Like they're either, putting out fires that, the poor hotshots were actually trying to develop, or they're not pouring the retardant on them when they actually need it to save their own lives. Or they're like, they decimate like this shack that they were going to protect, the hotshots were set out to protect. The air tanker just drops like 20 tons of water, just flattens everything. They did not get a sort of this was not flattering for those guys.
No, it wasn't. And it does turn out from reading that GQ article that at least on the day of all that stuff was real, they really did put out a backburn fire that they weren't supposed to, and they did fail to rescue them. But also there was a good amount of confusion as to where they actually were.
I suppose I would probably pour it in the wrong place too.
Yes. And again, helicopters. Don't ever get in a helicopter, and like riding a helicopter over a frickin' wildfire has to be dangerous as all get out. So I did think that was funny when they have Miles Teller character like take his first helicopter and be all freaked out, and I was like, I'm guessing if firefighters die, that's how they die.
By falling out of helicopters?
Helicopter accidents, yeah. I mean, remember there were 3 deaths in Charlottesville.
That's very true. That's very true.
So anyway, so is my airline safety background coming in. One of the reasons there are so many helicopters is helicopters are there to fly into places where you can't bring anything else, like Coast Guard helicopters or these helicopters on top of fires, which create a whole bunch of drafts in the air and are very dangerous and scary. Anyway, PSA.
Oh, man. I can't imagine. Yeah.
I can't imagine any of it. It all looked horrible. And I think that was funny, too, when they talked about how much the job itself actually sucked.
There's like a whole lot of digging in this job. I would have been, if I had joined up thinking that this is like a glamorous, like, heroic firefighting job, and then I find out, I'm going to be digging 90% of the time. That was actually to their credit, for sure. Like anyone who says, all right, I'm in. I will dig for days in like 104 degrees in the desert. I will dig for you, sir. My hat's off to those fellows.
Yeah. Well, on that note, do you want to explain the scale and give a social impact score?
Sure. The social impact score, we're going to give Only the Brave a scale on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being it changed nothing, 10 being the world we once knew was gone forever. What do you give it?
I don't know if this is if this movie is a leading indicator or a lagging indicator. It feels like a leading indicator, and by all means, tell me if I'm wrong. So I actually want to give it as high as a 5.
Wow, really?
Yeah, I think this is a really different kind of movie. I think that, again, several years ago, making a movie about the heroism of a hotshot team really would not have focused on the family stuff. And the movie, frankly, in Brandon McDonough's choice, solidly comes down on the side that no amount of work is worth it. That a man's first responsibility is to be physically present to his family. I think that's new. I think it's different. I don't know how many people are going to see it to get that message, but I think it is going to get a ton of replay on TNT. I predict that. So
that's true. It could come back with residual effects. Yeah, I respectfully, I'm going to go ahead and give it a 2.
Yeah.
I just didn't see it kind of hitting very hard on anything in particular. I'd love to think that your take on it is actually closer to the truth. That would be great.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Movies That Matter. If you did, please take a second to leave a review on iTunes. Check out www.moviesthatmatterpodcast.com for links to things we've discussed. And if you want to talk to us, leave a comment on our Facebook page or on Twitter with our tag @MoviesMatterPod. Also check Twitter to find out what movie we're overanalyzing next. And remember, movies matter.
And so do you.
We'll see you next time.